Today on Sports Central, we're going to be kicking off our scheduled previews for the 2020 offseason with a pretty good team from last season. That is the Georgia Bulldogs, of course. Once again, they were able to make it to the SEC championship game. They played at LSU, and that game was pretty much what ended their hopes of making the college football playoff. But in this video here today, we're going to be going over a few players that this team will be losing, who they're going to be returning, and also we're going to be going over their schedule for the first time this offseason. Georgia last season went 12-2, and as for their games since November, of course, they've got a few really good wins here. They beat Florida in the first game in November, 24-17. They also shut out Missouri, 27-0. They also got a really good win at Auburn, 21-14. So kind of after that game, you could tell, Georgia was on a roll. They were ranked way up in the top 5. It looked like Georgia would be a big contender for the college football playoff, of course, until the postseason came along. But nonetheless, they also beat Texas A&M by 6. They've destroyed Georgia Tech on the road, 52-7. And of course, once again, they lost in the SEC championship game to LSU. But of course, LSU is completely out of the ordinary. But that was still a really rough loss, 10-37. And then as for their bowl game, they played Baylor in the Sugar Bowl, and they ended up beating them 26-14. So overall, once again, it was a really good season for Georgia. Nothing to be upset about at all. And really, overall, this stat does not really help us a whole lot as to determining whether Georgia will be good this season or not. Of course, from September to October, they were 6-1, but they were also 6-1 from November to the postseason. So really, this team was a very consistent team all season long. So overall, that is really good. That's of course, you want to be as consistent as you can be throughout the entire season. That's why Georgia was so good last season. Here's a few key points as to Georgia going into this offseason. They do lose quarterback Jake from the NFL draft. That happened about a week or two ago, so that's something to note there. That's going to be a tough loss for them to have to return. They do have Stetson Bennett, and it looks like he will take over at quarterback here for the 2020 season, but of course, who knows if they can get a recruit in, whether he'll take over or not, but we'll have to see. Once again, we'll know a whole lot more once we get to spring. We're only in late January right now, but they do lose their top running back, DeAndre Swift, also to the NFL draft, and he's going to be a tough loss. He had 1,400 yards for this team, 8 touchdowns as well, so he's going to be a tough one to replace. Nonetheless, they also lose their second running back in Brian Harriet, so that's also going to be another tough loss. He had 600 yards and he had 7 touchdowns himself as well. So they clearly used him a lot in the red zone. They're going to have someone that's going to be able to replace him. They do have their top returning running back as their third one from this season, and that is Zamir White. And Zamir White put up a few stats as well. He put up 428 yards and 3 touchdowns. So overall, they used the running backs much more than the passing game this season. Of course, for Jake Fromm, he had 2,800 yards of passing, 24 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions. So overall, he was a pretty good quarterback. He didn't put up a whole lot of yardage, but his touchdown-interception ratio was actually really good, 24-5. That ain't all that bad, not at all. But nonetheless, looking at the wide receiver position, I'd say the wide receiver position is probably one of the best that this team will have next season. Of course, they returned their top receiver in George Pickens. And last season, he was used, but he wasn't used a whole lot. He had 747 yards and 8 touchdowns, and they also returned most of their other wide receivers as well. So the receiver position should be pretty good for Georgia next season. But there are a couple other concerns on offense as to the quarterback position and also the running back position, which is certainly concerning going into 2020. They do return their entire offensive line, which is huge as well. So for whoever quarterback is going to be taking over for this program next season, they honestly will have it much easier than Jake Fromm did, as they are returning their entire offensive line. They do lose their top tight end in Charlie Werner, and he really wasn't used all that much by Jake Fromm, but nonetheless, once again, it is still a loss down there on the offensive line. They do lose 3 on the defensive line, so this defensive line is losing quite a bit. They'll also lose a linebacker and a safety, so one in the secondary as well. So overall for Georgia, that does kind of concern me. And it would not surprise me to see Georgia have more of a rebuilding year in 2020. I don't know if they'll be as good next season as they were this year. I really thought this was Georgia's year to do something very impressive in the SEC and possibly making it into the college football playoff. But overall, I wouldn't say it was a disappointing season for Georgia. It was still a great season overall. But looking at next year, it does concern me a little bit. Here's your first look at their 2020 schedule, and they've got a bit of an odd schedule. You start off the season against Virginia. And that should be an interesting game to start off with, of course, the big SEC-ACC matchup. Then you also have Eastern Tennessee State in the next week, pretty much a pushover game there. Then, of course, Alabama's the week after that. You got Alabama in week number 3, so that's going to be a really tough challenge very early on. So, overall, you got 2 challenges in your first 3 games. They do face Louisiana Monroe and Vanderbilt, 2 easier games. Auburn at home this season, that's going to be good. Missouri on the road could be interesting. Florida at home. So, really, they got most of their tough opponents at home. Florida and Auburn could certainly be into that. Virginia as well. Tennessee could be a bit of a better team next season. Watch out for them. So, yeah, of course, I mean, you still have a couple of tough road games, though, as well. I mean, South Carolina, that won't be a simple game. Same as Alabama as well. Watch out for that one. But nonetheless, they also travel to Kentucky and South Carolina and Missouri as well with that. And then they got Georgia Tech to finish off the season as usual. That big SEC-ACC rivalry. Well, Georgia Tech hasn't won in a long time, but nonetheless, yeah, it should be an interesting game there. I think that these are your 4 guaranteed wins for Georgia going into next season. I'm not going to be predicting all the games here in our schedule previews. In the schedule preview, I'm just going to give you guys a couple of games that I think will be obvious wins, games that should be won pretty easily. And I'm going to give Georgia 4 in this situation. I'm going to say they beat ETSU, Louisiana Monroe, and then 1 conference game in Vanderbilt, and then, of course, another Power 5 matchup against Georgia Tech. So, overall, I mean, Georgia doesn't have all that easy of a schedule next season. Of course, Virginia being one of your non-conference games, that'll be a little bit tougher. But then again, I mean, Virginia's losing a lot of talent. I don't think they'll be as good next season as they were this year, but that should be an interesting game there. Nonetheless, I mean, once again, Alabama on the road. There are certainly quite a few challenges in here. I think your record estimation for this team is going to be 9-3 to 10-2. I think overall, I mean, if Jake Fromm was returning to this team, I would have probably said 9-3 to 11-1. But I don't think that they're going to get more than 9 wins here. I mean, it's going to be certainly close. Of course, with it being more of a rebuilding year possibility for Georgia, it could be a little bit interesting there. But once again, we are still very, very early on. This is our first schedule preview of the entire offseason. So, yeah, once again, lots of offseason to go. And we'll be going over Georgia once again in the summer or so for our final prediction. And also, we'll be going over all of these games in that prediction as well. So, once again, thank you guys all for watching, though. Stay tuned for more content. Be sure to subscribe if you'd like to. I'd really appreciate that. Show some support as well. And I will see you all later.